Final Fantasy II is the first of the politically driven Final Fantasies. It packs more of a narrative than its predecessor, and it certainly sets a much darker tone, what with the heavily involved war plot and constant death of your companions and NPCs. While I have stated in the past that I feel as though the constant death of characters around you gave the game a rinse and repeat-esque vibe, and also kind of killed any and all narrative tension, while I still agree with that sentiment, I did find it cool that there seemed to be a constant between each character that died, and it had more to do with them just being fourth party members. What inspired the creation of this video was actually the Dawn of Souls portion of the game, the bonus dungeon accessible at the end where you play as your fallen comrades. It is here that we see more insight into these characters, Scott, Joseph, Minwoo, and Ricard. With Scott and Joseph in particular benefiting from this additional time, seeing as we spend very little time with them in the base game. Now, while the main theme of Final Fantasy II is war and the consequences war can have on children, families, and entire nations, the notion is not meant to be entirely depressing, or at least I don't think it is. Despite each character hailing from a different part of the world with varying levels of involvement with the Rebel Alliance, each character represented the theme of rebirth, or passing the world on to a new generation and entrusting them with rebuilding it as they saw fit. Our first character, Scott, was the eldest prince of Kashuan and held an alliance with Princess Hilda of Fynn due to the oppressive nature of the Empire in combination with his feelings for her. He actually died trying to secure a way for the Rebel Alliance to take back their home. Scott was noble and courageous, and when he died, he left behind a brother who thought himself to be cowardly and weak, Gordon. Now, as a kid, I was never a fan of cowardly characters. Shout out to Edward from Final Fantasy IV. However, now that I am older, I find characters who initially lack belief in themselves or convictions in their actions growing into someone who fights for what they believe in to be immensely satisfying. As such, I believe Gordon being Scott's living legacy and having those convictions passed on to him, even becoming a central part of the rebellion himself, is such an apt representation of rebuilding ourselves and our ideals in order to rebuild a world that is more fair for all its inhabitants. Joseph's connection is a little more intimate, what with his most cherished person being his daughter Nellie. Seeing as she is both the reason Joseph agrees to work with us in the first place, along with the fact that she is the one he waited to see before departing to the afterlife, we can conclude that she is who he is effectively leaving the world to. I think it's interesting that we see a variety of different relationships. Scott's leaving behind his brother and the one he loves, while Joseph is leaving behind his child. Conversely, Minwoo doesn't have any one person that he is closest to, outside of maybe Hilda and her father. But rather he represents the belief in a cause. He truly believes that in order for us to win against the Emperor, we need to access the Ultima spell, and has no problems with sacrificing his life in order for us to acquire it. A martyr of sorts. Ricard represents a similar line of thought, with him being the last real dragoon, with only the young dragoon child, his mother, and a single wyvern remaining. He leaves behind the legacy of his people, along with the hope that the dragoons will take to the skies once more. Again, in the Dawn of Souls version of Final Fantasy II, the Dragoon child is named Kain as well, which is very interesting, because as we all know, or may know, Kain from Final Fantasy IV is the leader of the Dragoons, so it's a nice little nod that he was able to preserve his culture. So in Scott and Joseph, we see a desire to leave a better world for loved ones. With Minwoo and Ricard, there is a desire to leave behind an idea with a group of people. When thinking about it that way, I believe it gives their deaths more of an emotional impact than the rinse and repeat nature of the story serves to. And I think that Final Fantasy II, out of all of the games, would best be served by having some kind of remaster or remake, because the story and the structure of the game is very solid. However, it just wasn't able to do itself justice within the limitations of the way it was presented. One final thing I wanted to note is that all of the characters that die are on the older side of Final Fantasy characters, with the four I previously mentioned, Cid, and the King of Fynn, while the characters left behind are almost all exclusively teenagers or young adults. I think this fact also helps to further accentuate the fact that the characters dying aren't solely meant to represent the losses and pain involved with war, but rather the hope that their sacrifice can leave behind. With that, I bid you good night. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.